Welcome back to Meet Bridget, a show that sheds light on the often untold teenage and young adult stories of successful women from all types of backgrounds and in all sorts of careers. This show is an extension of Bridget, a confidence coaching service for young women. I'm Asha Gabriel, and I co host this show alongside my best friend and Bridget COO, Kashia Rosenberg. I'm so excited to kick off season 4. Yes, 4. Oh my gosh, of the show, interviewing my dear friend, Cary. Caitlin is a vice president of sales at Locala and leading omnichannel drive to commerce media platform delivering hyperlocal advertising and insights at scale. Don't worry, she's going to explain to us what that means. And Caitlin has over 15 years of 360-degree industry experience within sales, client agency, and strategy. Caitlin's a former New Yorker living that transplant life in Orange County, California. She's a working mom juggling her international travel schedule alongside preschool pickup. She has navigated some of the most notoriously cutthroat industries, including high-end New York fashion, advertising, and tech sales. Today, she's a mom, a wife, a sister, a daughter, and she leads a predominantly female team powering the ad campaigns behind some of the world's largest brands. Caitlin is an advocate for empowering women both in the workplace and in life. If you've listened to our season 3 closer interview of Alexandra Spitz, you've learned about the new mom school program here in Orange County and now nationally. And it's a sanctuary for new mothers in one of the most vulnerable and taxing moments that life has to offer. And this is where Caitlin and I met. Our daughters were born within days of each other. I vividly remember being so relieved to see Caitlin in a breastfeeding workshop, knowing that I wasn't the only bleary eyed mama struggling with what I thought would be totally easy and natural. We connected right away, and so did our little girls. And I'm so thrilled to have her on today. So, welcome, Caitlin, to Meet Bridget.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I remember one of our first mom walks. I think you were telling me about Bridget, and I just felt like it was such an inspiring mission that you guys are starting and, turning it into a podcast. So I'm very honored to have me on to talk more.
We've talked a little bit about your background and everything. I'm excited to share it with our audience. So, we always like to jump in and paint the picture of what you're like as a very little girl. You are the youngest of 3 girls. So, in the spirit of sisterhood, I'd love to dive right into that. Like being the youngest, what was it like growing up for you?
Yeah, so I'm the youngest of three. I have two older sisters. So, being so much younger, especially for my 8-year-old older sister, I was kind of like their play doll growing up, I think. When you're so much younger, I think it's definitely harder to connect, especially when you're so young, because my oldest sister was going off to college when I was 9. So, for a lot of my life, I kind of felt as if I was an only child in my more like teenage years, for instance. But I think it also caused me to grow up a little bit faster, seeing that they were so much older than me. I have a very vivid memory of not sneaking in, but going into my sister's room and she was watching 90210, and I sat there reading a Cosmopolitan magazine as these, kind of more mature topics were coming up. So, sisterhood is obviously great, and we've become much more closer now that we're older and that the age gap has kind of dissipated a bit.
It's interesting to hear because I have an older sister that's 2 years older than me, and I often felt like we were so close in age that it was like people couldn't not compare us. Like, we were so close that it's like we're just together everywhere. So, it was that element of, like, comparison and competition was always there. How would you
Mhm.
say having a bigger gap with your sisters, like, was there that, when you were looking at them, did you feel similar to them, different to them? Did you feel like people were comparing the 3 of you?
Yeah, I mean, I think, seeing my sister so much older than me and seeing their accomplishments, when you're only, 9 or 12 years old, you just don't have that much to have your mom or dad brag about at that time. So while my sisters were, accomplishing so much, I kind of felt the need to, compete against them. And I think that led for my own internal struggle of trying to compete against them as well. Having 3 girls, all somewhat very similar to one another, I think, too, just breeds competition. More so, I think, for me and my middle sister, we're very similar in terms of, our social background, the sports that we played. And, I think there was always kind of a little bit of that competitiveness. For me, I wanted to be so much like them that I tried to follow in their footsteps for sure. I even went to the same college as my middle sister, for instance, and I played soccer. And I think I just idolized them so much. But at the same time, I think that there was a piece of competition, whether it be for, my parents' affection or just kind of around living up to their shadow. I was always kind of seen as mini me. My sister, my middle sister, she kind of did everything 4 years before me, and then there was a gap, and then I entered into high school or into middle school, and so everyone kind of knew her, and she's a phenomenal woman. She is so smart, so athletic, so, such a big personality, and I think, she wasn't somebody who was a wallflower, so everyone kind of knew who she was, so to a degree, it was great because I was coming up with a great reputation of being, the younger Cary sister, but I think at the same time, it also led to an extra eye on me about how is she gonna compare? Is she gonna be as athletic? Is she gonna be as outgoing, as, social and popular and all of that? So, I definitely think, it put a little bit of more of the limelight on me that I felt the need to compete for sure.
Yeah, I think that as a younger sister, it's an interesting dynamic because I think also older sisters, 'cause she, my co-host, is an older sister, and she's taught me a lot about like kind of the experience of being an older sister and the pressures of kind of paving the way and also wanting to like guide your siblings and all of that. I feel like as a younger sister, I can relate to you in that like I vividly remember my sister and I, she was 2 years older than me, so we were in high school at the same time. But like when I entered high school, it was great because it was like, "Oh, everybody already knows kinda who I am." Like, all her friends called me Little Lannon, so all of that was cool in a way, but I feel like we kinda went through these phases of, like, when we were young, we were similar. We liked similar things. We looked pretty similar, we had a very similar upbringing, so it's like, yeah, duh, you're going to be alike in some ways, but I remember when we were younger, we butted heads about, like, those similarities so much.
Mhm.
And it was like, "No, like, you bought the same jacket I did," and that would cause this, like, blow up fight. And then I feel like as we got kind of a little bit older, then it like the conflict became like, "Oh, wait, like, why are you doing things differently than me?" And, like, getting uncomfortable with our differences. And now I feel like I don't know if it's because we've kind of both entered motherhood. I feel like it's like, "Oh, wow, the similarities we have are really cool and, like, special because no one else is as similar to us in the entire world, and the differences we
Mhm.
have are okay," you know? But it's taken that
Right.
whole arc to, like, be okay with the sister life.
We don't have a second sibling yet, but I think that I always look at like your girls, for instance, and I'm so excited. I'm sure just as you are for, when I see my friends have two girls or sisters, because I think it is such a special bond. It just in those growing up years, it can definitely take a while to figure out your relationship, and I think especially when you're
Totally.
younger and trying to figure out yourself as well, it definitely is more of a struggle. But I definitely think that because my sisters are so much older than me, it was also I longed for more of that female connection, kind of more my own age, and so I think I took more of, like, sisterhood in some of my friendships and my female friendships. So, that to me, I feel like was always very important, and I definitely saw, the value of relationships. My mom was so social, she still is to this day, talk to anyone in the grocery store, and I think that she always made it very important to have, friends around us. We were always the house that people would go to. And so for me, I think I kind of latched on more to like my female girlfriends because of that, because I wasn't as close. And I think seeing my two older sisters be so much closer just because they went to high school together and they went to college at the same time. So I kind of longed for that sisterhood, which then put me more into having the female relationships in my life.
Totally. So your mom you've mentioned that your mom was a stay-at-home mom and a preschool teacher. Was that after you guys were kinda grown? What was that like? What was the dynamic with your parents, and how did that kinda impact your childhood?
Yeah. So, my mother was a stay-at-home mom. She's the salt of the earth. She was definitely made to be a mother. And I value her so much. Even to this day, her as a grandmother is extremely, extremely helpful, and it makes me appreciate her. I think so much more. She was such a mother that once we left the house, she became a preschool teacher. So I think it's just in her nature to be so nurturing. My dad was, he's from a very small town in Minnesota. He grew up on a dairy farm, one-room schoolhouse. It's very much, kind of joke when parents say, like, "I walked up the hill both ways." Like, I definitely think that was probably true in my dad's scenario. And so, he was the oldest of 5. He had a huge family, and he kind of made himself into, a very successful businessman, and he had that work ethic, I think, from being, raised in such a way of, hardworking, would wake up at 4 a.m., wouldn't go to sleep until, definitely far after the sun came, down. And so he built his own business kind of from scratch. He was a business owner, and having both that, seeing my dad and owning his own business and being such an entrepreneur, and he traveled so much, and then having seeing that was, I definitely think, helped me propel into having the work ethic that I do, kind of having that mentality of you just kind of have to get it done. There are no excuses. But he placed such an importance on both work ethic and education, and living the life that you want to live will come as long as you find what you love to do. And I think that's what he would always instill is, find something that you love to do and you'll never work a day in your life. Like that was very much true. And so because he was from Minnesota and the Midwest, he definitely instilled more of the Midwestern values in us as well. And I think, my mom is from Buffalo, and we moved to, out just outside of New York City into New Jersey. So very different lifestyles than what they were used to growing up. So, having that Midwestern kind of value and roots, I feel like really grounded me in a place that, not to say doesn't have values by any means, because, it definitely does, but I think that it definitely has helped me throughout my life kind of keep grounded.
Totally. When did you guys move to New Jersey?
My parents lived there when they had my older sisters. They moved away, and then when I was 3, we moved back. So I grew up in New Jersey for, the majority of my life, and we lived in northern New Jersey in, the tri-state area. So if you're unfamiliar with the tri-state, it's essentially, New York, Connecticut, and New Jersey, just outside of Manhattan. I lived about 60 minutes outside of New York City.
That's so cool, and to be able to kinda have both of those influences. My dad's from the Midwest too, and I know what you mean when you talk about that kinda just I don't even know how to explain it. Like, it's like a Midwestern I feel like wholesome isn't the right word, but there's just something like you walk my dad's from Chicago, and it's like you walk around in
Mhm.
Chicago and, like, people are in a rush, they're in a big city and stuff, but, like, they're just a little bit, like, friendlier. You ask someone
Yeah.
for directions, and, like, they're probably gonna try to help you, and
Right.
in the big city, it's maybe not quite the same, but at the same time to be able to experience just the culture and the global feel of a city like New York from the time you're a child and being kind of right outside it. Did you guys move for your dad's business that was growing at the time?
Yeah, so he didn't start his company until we moved to New Jersey. So when I was a lot younger, he was traveling way more. Even when I was, growing up and a kid, so for when my sisters were young, he was traveling probably 2 weeks out of every single month. So my mom really, was kind of holding the fort down by herself, but he was building kind of a business. And now looking back and being in a career myself, he's just what he's built is so amazing to me because I see it from more of a corporate perspective. And, so he then started his own company when we moved to New Jersey, when maybe I was about 7. And it was established in Japan. So he was traveling to Japan about, every month or so, which when you think about how long a flight to Japan is from New York City is pretty incredible. It was before the days of Zoom. And so he, would travel a lot, even when I was younger too.
What kind of business was it? If you mind me asking.
So he had a international telecommunications company. So, he was traveling to Japan, the Middle East, Europe. So, if you kind of ask me what he did, I can probably give you like the little snippets, pieces of it. But yeah, he had his own international telecommunications company.
So once you moved to New Jersey, did you feel immediately like at home in your surroundings in elementary school? What were you like in like elementary, middle, those kind of young childhood years?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, I had a very wholesome upbringing when I think about it. in my younger years. I think because living in just outside of New York, I lived in a very upper to middle upper class area. And I think when my parents first moved there, it was definitely more wholesome, if that makes sense. It was farms and, horses, and there was a lot of, families that had kind of moved away, and there was a lot more space. And when I was growing up, we saw the town kind of shift. We saw a lot more, kind of McMansions built come in, and there's the type of people that were moving and were changing. And not to say necessarily bad, it was just that the values I think were a little bit more different than what my parents were kind of, set out to establish as our upbringing. And so, it was a lot different than I think what my parents originally intended. And so because of that, I think it was a little bit more difficult for my dad and my mom to kind of understand me more so than when my sisters were growing up in that same town, which was kind of unique. So for me, I was very social. I was very active. I loved, sports, but I also, counterbalanced that with fashion, for instance. Like I absolutely loved art. I read Vogue when I was 7. And so that for me, I felt like kind of was just a little bit different than the average kid. I think for me, I kind of set my sights in terms of like a career at a very young age. I found a passion that I really loved and did that at every opportunity that I could. And so for me, I kind of felt always a little bit different in that regard, but I think for me, I think my dad kind of also saw that as, more, oh, it's just materialistic, instead of seeing that as more, oh, this is like a passion of mine. So that I felt like was a little bit, different and unique. But I ended up making a, start of my career out of it. So it definitely led to something. I kind of turned that idea from him that was, okay, if you have a passion about something, you'll never work a day in your life. And I definitely started, my career through that, which was great.
Totally. And I think that, I mean, that's such wisdom for him to instill in you. And I obviously am like a big fan of that whole idea and concept. I remember kind of thinking that when I was young, but also not really truly knowing that it's like, no, if you like something, there probably is some kind of career in and around it if you want to explore it, including in, fashion, like you started with. Our whole mission at Bridget is really to like make real as many pathways as possible. So a young woman or older woman making a second act, could really connect with like, oh, this is the real type of woman that can go into this job, or she tried and this one, and now she's in this career. Just to
Yeah.
really illuminate how many different careers there are out there, and that a career can take all sorts of different curves and turns. So I love to hear about you, starting your career in something that you're just really interested in. You also have mentioned to me that your dad pointed out that you were like a natural sales from a young age. Can you kind of describe that and what part of your personality he sort of connected to that?
Yeah. So when I was 7, for instance, I wanted a trampoline and I wrote, 1,000 times over, like, please can I have a trampoline? Please can I have a trampoline? I think I just left it on his desk one day, and I think for me, I feel like, I never took no for an answer, and I feel like I still don't. Like, if there is something out there that I want, or if I'm getting no from either, a client or a job or anything in life, I feel like I still try and go after it. And I think he was in sales and he led a huge sales team for a very long time. So it was either being, a seller or a lawyer. I feel like my two paths that probably, law probably would have been my second career if I didn't end up where I am now. Very different start from my fashion career. But yeah, I think, for me, I was always very driven, very competitive. And so I think that he kind of saw some of those traits in me, probably because he did run a sales team for so long, that he definitely saw those things, that if I wanted something, I, kind of talked my way into it or found the way around it to get that. And I think that was something that he saw in me and that I still feel in myself, is was very unique for that age, for instance, trying to find the way to get it.
Absolutely. I love you describing that because it's definitely something that I have observed in you. You are a very, you're focused. Like if you set your sights on something, you find a way and you figure it out, and you're not really shaken by having to take turns or do it a different way or figure out a new solution. I'd love to dive into more of like so you were really into fashion. You were starting to think you
Mhm.
might want to start your career that way. Obviously, you had access to New York City and were influenced a little bit by the change in your neighborhood at the time and kind of what was going on. So there's probably a lot of amazing aspects of living near a big city like New York. But did it also affect you in other ways? I know you were saying that with your bigger sisters, you were already kinda growing up quickly. Like, how was high school for you?
Yeah, so, I think living near New York City was definitely, I didn't fully appreciate it, I don't think, until much later in life. For me growing up and having that be my exposure to a city, I distinctly remember going to Boston where my sister went to college and asking my mom, "Well, where's the city?" And she was like, "You are in it." To me as a kid, I just thought that all cities were like New York. And so to kind of have that moment of that aha moment of like, "Oh wow, this is kind of a unique situation of where I live and the things that am able to access, are both good and but they could also in other ways be good. I'm sure, I found them very fun when I was 16 years old, but looking back on it and having a kid of my own now, I think it led to a lot of access to things that I think were made me grow up a lot faster. I mean, we would be 15 years old going into New York City and, getting fake IDs or going to bars that were accepting your library card essentially just to, shoo the cops away. So, seeing all of that, you get diversity in New York City, which is amazing, and I think there's an energy that is just unreplaceable, which is so imperative, I think, for young kids to see the amount of diversity within the world and not live in necessarily this whole bubble, but at the same time, it can also have the opposite effect. I think I was exposed to a lot more things growing up that not the average teenager was or necessarily should be. I think I started drinking a lot earlier than most kids probably. I was going to clubs when I was still in high school. I was dressing a certain way because we wanted to seem older. And I think, we were living definitely in the phase of the Nikki and Paris Hilton and idolizing that socialite in New York City and kind of looking at those idols to per se for probably the wrong reasons. But New York City at the same time, it opened up a lot of doors, and I think that the access that I had to both internships or jobs, was extremely beneficial to live so close to that access, in the long run. But it definitely made for an interesting high school experience as well.
I know, I feel like it dates us a little bit, but, I vividly remember I mean, when we were in high school, it was before Instagram, but we had
Thank
our
God.
own it was almost, but I feel like there was sort of this vacuum of, like, what pop culture was, like, it was such, like, a little sphere, and it was projected to us in a very, like, directed way with the magazines and all the editing and I just remember looking at, like, Teen Vogue. It was also the era of, like, the Kate Moss, like, super skinny models and everything, and I just remember kinda I grew up in a small town, so it was almost like the opposite, but we were all looking at the same stuff, and feeling the pressures of being a kid in high school means that, like, things aren't done blossoming yet, and, like, the world you're gonna
Mhm.
learn a lot more, and your world's about to get a lot bigger. So I think that, regardless of era or who's in vogue at the time, those pressures during that time can be so much, and make your world feel so small and focused on having to look a certain way, or especially with like having big sisters or friend groups,
Yeah, for
tell me
sure.
a
I
little bit
think I
about
think
what were your friend groups like when you were young?
yeah, so I was I kind of latched on to the right people if that makes sense, like very early on in life. For good and for bad. I think girls, I love having a daughter, but it makes me so terrified for the years that she's going to be bullied and who's mad at who and for stupid reasons or you wore the wrong thing and it just makes me, it makes me happy that I've gone through some of those experiences for now in motherhood that I can help guide her because I've been there, but during it, it's a terrible time when you're the one that's left out, and you kind of, have this mean girl mentality for sure that you don't want to be the one on the outside, but when you are, because it's terrible. And so I think because I was very much felt the need to have, so close of female relationships that when they were, in that mean girl age of, between the ages of, seventh grade or eighth grade, I took it a lot harder because of that. I developed really good friendships. Some of my best friends, still to this day, I kind of met really young and they are the best people in the world. But we went through that all kind of together and we were mean to each other. I mean, we'll probably sit back and laugh at it now. But, I was definitely going through the awkward girl phase just a little bit later. I entered high school with braces and I didn't have a straightener. I mean, I definitely don't look like the 12-year-olds now, kind of just trying to figure out style and all of that. When I went to high school, the high school that I went to was very intimidating. I kind of joke that it's like it was what high school movies are, made teen movies are made about. It was just an intimidating high school. I think, being so close to New York and having it be kind of from an affluent area, um, it was a little bit of a struggle, to kind of, or it was just more intimidating because you see these girls that feel like they look so much older or they are so much older, or they're getting so much more attention from, the senior boys or whatever it is. And I felt like I really struggled with that because I never felt like, I lacked a lot of confidence, I feel like in my beginning years going into high school, just because I felt like I was a little bit more awkward. And probably because I lacked a lot of confidence within that, it showed, I'm sure. But I think, looking back on it, I definitely you always think that you're worse than you are when you're actually in it, so I definitely feel like I wish I had the more confidence because I didn't have anything to lack confidence in.
I can so connect with what you're saying. I felt similar, in high school. I always felt like I was in the popular groups in a way, but I was sort of peripheral. Like I wasn't the girl in the spotlight. I wasn't the girl getting all the boys' attention. I was not on the outside, but I wasn't like on
Right.
the inner circle, which is almost like such a weird place to be because I really wanted to be in the spotlight and I didn't really see. I think I was so focused on, what other people were thinking and who was who, so focused on all of that that I couldn't even really see my own strengths at the time. That coupled with like I was like a late bloomer. I grew like, 4 or 5 inches in high school. I was just like not comfortable in my body yet. I think I entered high school with braces too. It was just that kind of process. I was just not at home in myself for probably the majority of high school, if I'm being honest. So I can really relate to that. And I think that there, especially now with everything on the internet and stuff, there's such a pressure to be like, oh, boom, confidence, just have it,
Mhm.
and you should have a profile and out, like, just there's such a emphasis on showing off what you have, I guess. And it was there then too, in a way. But I think that it's fun to kinda explore confidence as not necessarily something you turn on or off, but like, just a interest and exploration of who you are and how you're changing.
I feel like it also probably might feel the same way of like the Midwestern values. I probably felt a little bit too like, I'm seeing some of my girlfriends, and they're doing different things, and I kind of always they called me C-biz because I was always so business-like, because I was always like the good girl, I feel like,
Mhm.
and I think, now there's some of my strengths, but I think I was always a little bit more of like the good one as well. I mean, so I think that definitely contributed to feeling a little bit more of like an outcast, when looking back on it, it was probably more of a strength than feeling like I was, the one doing all of the dangerous things
Totally.
necessarily.
How did you kind of think about college at that time? It sounds like, your sisters also went to college, so it sounds like something that you never, like, questioned that you were going to go to college, but how did you kind of think about it, and what did you want out of your college experience before you applied?
Yeah. So I applied to colleges. I wanted the big rah-rah school, experience. I applied to Penn State and Purdue and, I looked out in California just because I've always been so drawn to California. It's kind of one of the reasons as to why I'm out here now, and so I really wanted that feeling of big school and camaraderie. I wanted to celebrate and, in my college. And so my sister She went to James Madison University, which is, I kind of saw firsthand the experience that she had. And it had definitely that raw feel, but also a smaller wholesomeness to it. And I think I also liked the comfort of seeing what I was getting into. There was not much risk in going and, being the first to experience it and absolutely hate it, for instance. So I definitely followed in her footsteps there. And I absolutely, loved the decision that I made. But for me, I also coupled it with, what I wanted to do in life. And I had weeded out my decision to kind of move on from fashion, for instance. I mean, I would attend FIT in my summers when I was in high school, and found that it was extremely cutthroat, and knew that I wanted to maybe a career in something creative, but maybe that fashion design specifically was not it. I just felt like, I got a good taste of what I didn't want out of that part of the industry. And so I kind of set my sights on something different, going into, marketing or PR for some fashion or for event planning. And so JMU had a really good hospitality and tourism program and business school. So I kind of set my sights on, what I eventually wanted to do in life. So that's kind of how I narrowed it down.
That's such a good point you're making about, because I think when we are young, we envision careers, and it's almost like for every industry, when you're thinking of it and you're not in it yet or exploring it, you think like when you think fashion, it's like fashion designer. And that's the job you think about in fashion, and when
Mhm.
in reality, in every industry, whether it's fashion or sports or food or, all these different bazillion industries out there. There's, yes, the one job you think about, like, oh, doctor at the hospital. Could also be a hospital in hospital management. You could be in hospital development. You could be in, in fashion. There's PR, there's fashion marketing, there's fashion finance. There's so many different ways you could still be in an industry without having the one job that maybe you saw in like a, you know, our first career
Yeah.
books, when we were young.
Well,
So,
exactly. I mean, I
right.
think, I saw Vogue when I was younger. I mean, and I just loved the way that creativity could come through and through fashion. I mean, I was probably the only 9-year-old that could name, all of the designers that I saw, and, or I could look at somebody's outfit and understand, what skirt was she wearing, which bag is that, just by the shape of it, or the texture that it is. So I kind of always loved the creativity piece of it, and so that's why I, went to FIT so that I could marry my love of that, but also with drawing. And I think that it was kind of more the first time where I was like, this is not the vibe I'm going for. Is just, you have to be extremely good in order to be successful in being a fashion designer specifically. And I just didn't love some of the people who were in my class, and I'm like, this is going to be my circle. I don't necessarily want this. And so I'm so glad that I tried it and I knew what I liked and what I didn't like. And I think that that really led me to internships and finding out what I loved from each single one, what I didn't like, and kind of to, you try so many different things. It really narrows you into what you do want to do in life. And I think that was my biggest takeaway for that part of trying to find what it is that I like. And from every job after that as well, and so that's how I started out in fashion and ended up in ad tech sales. So
Totally.
it's very, very different.
So your fashion jobs that you had were in, like, PR and events, right?
Mhm. Yep.
So when was that? Was that during college, before college, or after?
So it was during college. I had internships, free internships. Those were a thing back in the day. You just
The
essentially were
best.
doing it for the experience. Now I think you can get more college credit, or you have to legally get paid.
Yeah.
Um, but Yeah, I was at, PR firms that handled, some of the, large brands in both LA, or they handled talent. And then, from there, I applied to an internship at Saks, and miraculously, I got an internship at Saks, and that I absolutely loved. It was, I had a phenomenal boss who became like a mentor to me. And essentially, my summer project, I'm going to date myself, but she was like, figure out this social media thing.
Yeah.
And so it was like really my job to, kind of make connections with the bloggers at the time and do polls for them. And so, for instance, if they were doing some blog post on, resort wear, and I would go into Saks and pick out those pieces for resort wear that they would then put on their blog. And kind of, it was the beginning of social media. So that I found to be really, really fun. And I always, I kept in connection with her. And I think it really placed the value of having that mentor, one, but also just the value of the relationship, because when she moved to Bergdorf Goodman, and that's where I had my first job. So if you're not familiar with Bergdorf Goodman, just because there's only one of them, it's kind of the crown jewel of Neiman Marcus. So I felt like when I was graduating college, starting my career off at kind of like the top of the kind of the fashion department store within New York City was something that I feel like I really worked towards to get there, and, it was a great experience for all of the good and the bad.
Yeah. Well, I love that story too because even though, maybe the unpaid internship isn't quite so legal anymore, I think there is a lot of truth in that experience of where you start isn't necessarily where you're going to be going in a few years. But if you start somewhere and you apply yourself, you never know who's going to be watching you or taking a liking to you or seeing the way that you're working and might open a door for you later. I think just like really leaning into the relationships and people who take you under their wing, that's usually, I feel like, I remember when I first started thinking about like, okay, what does applying for jobs look like? And you go on the career websites and LinkedIn and all the places that have the job descriptions, and you're just like, "Oh, like, that's the job I want." I don't have any of the qualifications for it, so it's like, I guess I just can't do that job, you know? And then really realizing that it's like, I can get there, but, like, I have to get an in somehow,
Mhm.
and I have to get my feet wet, and it might not be the most glamorous start, especially in an industry like fashion, marketing, or, advertising in general. The first step in the door probably isn't gonna be it's not gonna feel like, "Oh, yeah, this is like I'm doing the thing I've always wanted to do," but leaning into those relationships and, obviously seeing them pay off for you.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's, you have to do all jobs to understand it. I think you do have to kind of start out at the bottom to appreciate the top, because you then can understand what the person, below you, once you get promoted, you can understand what the person below you has gone through, and kind of, their tenacity, and if they're willing to do all of the things. And there's definitely times when you're like, this is not what I want to be doing, but you can kind of look back and say, okay, I've been in your shoes. I know what you're going through, and kind of appreciate the top more when you can look down and say, I was there. I know what you're going through, or I know how much effort that takes, for sure, whether it was free or not. I think it was definitely building off of the experience, and that to me has been invaluable because it led me to where I wanted to go. I always say to people, try everything. Like, don't necessarily quit, finish it, but at least if you've tried it, it just adds a little bit more to your resume or what you want to do. But it also gives you the experience, and you will take away something from it, whether it's good or bad, for sure. And I think that's definitely what fashion and PR was for me. Was I found, again, the things that I really loved, and the things that I didn't love so much, whether that be, people that I worked with or worked for, or, the industry in general. I think it's shed so much light on something I idolized for so long. But I think now I had to experience it and see it for me to essentially say, okay, I'm okay to walk away from this, because this isn't necessarily what I want. And maybe I'll try something and use my creativity in another way, or use something else that I'm passionate or I know that I'm good at, just in a different way. And so that, for me, I felt like I at least accomplished what I wanted to do, and I learned something from it that made me, allow myself to move on.
I love that point, and, like, just the self-awareness to kinda see, like, I can do the things that I'm liking about this. I can, like, flex those muscles, but I can do them in a different setting. This isn't only me having to kinda shift or wanting to shift and try something new isn't starting over, it's just kind of changing your backdrop in a way.
Mhm.
So during that time, you're working at Bergdorf Goodman. You're living in New York City, I presume, at the time,
Mhm.
after college? So what was that like? How was your confidence, would you say, like, around that time and as you were kind of navigating your next steps?
I mean, New York City in your 20s is like the best place on earth. Like all of my friends then moved, they were all back from college and I kind of reconnected with a lot of my girlfriends from high school that were moving into the city. And so, that time in life it was just fun. You're living with four roommates in a small apartment, but everyone is kind of doing it all at the same time. And so, it was a different living on the outskirts and in, the suburbs of New York City is so different than living in it itself. And so it was definitely a very fun time. And I think, me with all of my friends kind of all navigating our careers was definitely eye-opening. But New York City, I think with the things that it gives you is definitely a good work ethic. You're surrounded by some of the most hardworking, experienced or talented people I think in the world, and I think that is so interesting just in terms of the people that you meet are so different from one another. They have so many backgrounds. You can, walk around and have a random conversation with somebody and you learn something completely different from, the place that you're from or the, way that you grew up or the job that is completely different than yours. And I think it's just led to so many interesting interactions. But yeah, New York in your 20s is very fun.
As you realized you were going to make a change, what were your next like couple stops in your career and were your takeaways from them?
Yeah, so, after working at Bergdorf's, I wanted some place that, had more of a young culture that I felt like I could make more of a difference, and I've always been very creative, and so I always had kind of leaned back to when I was in college, I had gone to, I was probably one of the only people that took their career, staff or career coaching in college, kind of seriously, and they, were like, everything that you love to do, it would really, lend itself really well to advertising. And so my sister had a connection at the time at a big agency, and I started working for the agency that covers Johnson and Johnson. So a lot of Johnson and Johnson brands like AccuView and Band-Aid, Clean and Clear, even their pharmaceuticals. So I went to Johnson and Johnson after that and worked in their advertising agency and loved it. It's a very young culture, but you work, you know, 12 to 20-hour days, and when you do your salary divided by the amount of hours that you work, it's very, very minimal, but it led for great experience. I say, like, if you could be at an advertising agency for 3 years, you gain 12 years of experience just because you learn so much. And so at that job I was helping build the content and branding around Johnson and Johnson's advertising and their commercials and their custom campaigns. And so it was a really good experience overall of understanding how an entire industry works, from media planning and buying to, the content creation and commercials to PR and social and so, kind of having all of that under one roof and under one job was really a good experience. So, and I think that, with it I also learned, within these two jobs that I kind of came out of college with, definitely learned I had different varying bosses, good and bad. And I think I saw a lot of the ways to act as a manager, but also the ways, not to act as a manager or how to treat other people, for instance. I mean, it was the first time that I was, really in charge of the clients themselves. And so, that whole dynamic of a relationship, as well as, how, you should kind of conduct yourself in more of a client setting. But it was also good, between the two jobs. I don't want to necessarily, to downplay it, but I had a lot of female bosses, and I think that now it's kind of taught me the way not to conduct yourself as bosses as well. And so I think that taking the learnings from that, you have to kind of go through bad experiences too. And I think to lead, you don't have to be you can lead in a different way.
Yeah. I've had conversations with women who have worked in a variety of corporate settings who are around, in our age group and demographic. And I've heard quite a bit that, you can have there are some really phenomenal women, like the woman that kind of brought you up to Bergdorf that really like took you under her wing and created an opportunity for you. But I also think that the generation above us, there are some women that I think it's a product of having to really like fight tooth and nail for their positions and being probably one of the only women in the room in certain career paths. I feel like the operation then as managers sometimes is like a coming from a scarcity mentality, if that makes any sense. that just doesn't necessarily create opportunity in their wake. You know what I mean? I
Mhm.
experienced this in finance for sure at a time, and now I look back and I'm like, I can kinda understand it with, like, compassion because y I think that women, we just era over generation, like, where there's always some new kind of frontier for us to have to, navigate, but yeah, you can definitely be there's a lot of different ways that you can manage people, and the stereotypical, like, bad boss one isn't necessarily the most effective.
I fully agree, and I mean, especially coming from, you come from, a background of finance, but, and even modeling too, where I feel like you kind of have to speak your voice, and I think that you're completely right, is that and I think that there's a big misconception, and I think now we've kind of hopefully corrected that, or at least I try and correct it in my career, with some of my team as well, is that, you don't have to be the nastiest person in the room to get the most attention. You don't have to necessarily there's different ways to make yourself heard for sure. And that doesn't mean, by belittling or making a wake of, those below you because they're the people who should really, you should be mentoring and fostering their career growth. So yeah, I fully agree with that.
So you're in a position now where you're managing other people. Are there certain kind of ideas, mantras, characteristics that you really try to emanate as a leader? And where did you kind of get those from, if so?
Yeah, so I was very fortunate to have a phenomenal mentor when I moved into away from advertising and the agency into sales, and so I feel like I have learned a lot of kind of, those the managers and the bosses that I'd had in the past who kind of gave me this bad taste in my mouth, whereas completely flipped when I found somebody who actually took, me under their wing and made me feel as if I was their protege, even though I knew nothing at all. And I feel like, things that he had taught me or still teaches me, because I still work with him, is more of the understanding. You in order to lead, you really have to listen and you have to trust and believe in people. And, you can definitely lead, without an iron fist. That's, not the necessarily the way. You have just compassion and connection with people. And I think that when you can understand where somebody is coming from, if you just understand, for instance, their family life, or if they've had a bad week, you're a lot more sympathetic if, they might need to take off, for instance, or if they've had a bad quarter or what it might be. It's just understanding that the human first, I feel like leads to such a better work relationship. And, that's why I feel like the whole remote work for me was extremely difficult because I'm such a relationship person, and not being able to have those experiences outside of just meetings and being able to grab a drink with somebody or coffee or, go on a work trip with them, I think is so valuable to me because I get to know that person fully, not just who they are as a seller or as, insert job here. But, so for me, I feel like it's, kind of more leading with compassion and leading with understanding and raising that person up is definitely, you can be a mentor and you can guide them, but you don't have to necessarily be condescending or belittling or, ignoring kind of who they are as a person overall. So that's what I try and lead with, is being, more of a personable manager for sure. And I think, people are gonna, if they're motivated, they're gonna want to do their jobs. And if they like working for you, just like I've loved working for my mentors, is that they're gonna want to do good for you because, they don't wanna let you down, and I think that's the biggest motivator, and it's the number one reason why people stay or leave is because of their bosses, and if they like to work for you, then they're gonna wanna stay and they're gonna wanna do well.
Totally. I love how you're describing this too, because I think that when people hear the word sales and they're like, oh, would I be a good salesperson? There's kind of an ick that comes along with the word sales where it's like, oh, you're making people buy something, and it's from what I've found. I mean, there's so many different careers where sales is an element. My experience in real estate has been one for sure. And going into it, I was like, I don't know if I'm a natural salesperson, but the great salespeople that I've met really have no they don't have that ick to them at all. It's more of that combination of what you were describing when, your dad saw this persistence in you and the ability to kinda keep a deal on the tracks, and bring it back, back to where it needs to go until it's completed. A combination of that and really just a deep interest in understanding people and what makes them tick and their motivations and how you can kind of put those things together, the motivation, but then also everything it takes to make a deal happen. And I think that's very different from what people kind of think of from like the salesman in the movies. You can be very successful in sales without having any sort of, it's actually the opposite. You're not making people do something they don't want to do. You're helping them and understanding them deeply and giving them a path to what they ultimately want.
I mean, don't get me wrong, there are plenty of, what we call them used car salesmen. Like,
Yeah.
you get the vibe that they are just here, they're not there for your best interest. But the thing that I really love about sales is that, you can help people, right? Like, I'm not going to lead you into something that I don't genuinely, my heart of hearts feels like is going to be a good deal for you. And it's relationship based. And that for me was the number one driver for why I like sales. Cause yes, sometimes it's a game. Like, yes, you want to, get your sales as big as they can, and that's an accomplishment. But I think the people that I see that are the most successful in that just genuinely take an interest in their clients. Is that, they ask them how their weekends were, or they remember their birthdays, I mean, and they're not going to guide them, and you're more of a liaison and a partner than you are just, I want to get this deal in. Because I feel like the people who do that and they look so short term and don't look at that long term view, that long term relationship, are those that, you feel like you're being hustled and you're being sold to, and it's really more about relationship building than anything else.
Can you kind of paint the picture of what your day-to-day looks like in your job and exactly what your company does? I'm like, I
You
just
gave
earlier, and then I'm like, I'm sure it's
Yeah.
gonna went right over a lot of people's heads. So we'll break it down in layman's terms as much as you can.
Yes. So I oversee a sales team for an ad tech platform. So, ad tech essentially is advertising technology. We help power the technology behind the advertisements that you see, whether it be on your TV or your phone or digital out of home. So, essentially, a brand wants to ensure that the person that they're targeting is the correct person. And so, we have the technology that understands where consumers go offline. So, where you go throughout your day to day, the types of purchases that you make, the demographics that you are, so that when an advertiser is looking to run a media campaign or purchase advertising, it's getting directed towards the correct person. So, an example of this is like Pampers. If you want to target young moms or young parents who have, children who are within diapers. If you're targeting somebody, or if you're reaching a male who is 25 and single bachelor, that is a wasted budget for you. So, our company essentially helps, or this industry helps to understand, who you should be reaching, and then we help serve those types of advertisements to the consumer.
Where are you guys getting that data specifically? Are there tools? I mean, I know that like literally everything is listening and tracking and cookies and all the things.
I
Um,
still get freaked out when my phone gives me an ad when I'm talking about it. So
right? It's like I get freaked out and then I'm like, actually, no, I want to buy that. So I'm like,
it's I know.
well, that's not buying it
I
because
you're
there's so
like,
many
actually,
things.
yes.
Yeah, people are like, oh, where'd you get
Exactly.
that? I'm like, oh, it was an Instagram ad, but hey, it was a win-win in a lot of ways because, it's about connecting markets, right? But yeah, like what does it look
Um,
on the back end for
s
you?
so essentially that there is a lot of the data comes from your mobile device to understand where you go in the offline world. So, there's a thing called like a device ID. So, this is gonna sound very Big Brother, so nobody hate me for this, is that there's essentially a piece of code that sits on the back of all of your apps that understands, where you go in the physical world. It has nothing to do with your personal information. Nobody knows your name or your address or your telephone number or what you're chatting with to your best friend or the photos that are on your phone. There's another company, I'm sure, that does that, but it is not this one. But essentially it just tracks kind of where you go and the physical location that you are based off of a lat long. So I know that, I'm sitting in this house in Orange County, for instance, right now, and that I'm going to go to Whole Foods later, and that I might go to, this workout studio or whatnot. And so by collecting that, you can track the type of person that somebody is. So you can understand, where they shop, what are their behaviors. So we work with a lot of clients like within the QSR space or retail to understand, I want to reach my customers. I just don't know who they necessarily are. But through our technology, we can understand, that person we know is either a loyalist or that they're going to your competitor and serve them a different message based off of that.
Totally. And even like helping someone, say you're starting to make it feel less big brothery. You're starting a candle company and you're like, I think that my primary customer is, so and so. Could you also help someone gather like, okay, this is where you should be selling. Should you be more like e-commerce or should you have like a physical store in this place because these women from this age to this age all happen to live in this neighborhood, and they'd really buy that. Can you get like that granular with in terms of like advice?
Yeah, yeah. So we a lot of the times we help brands in their pre-planning phases, understanding where they should be spending their media, where they should be placing new stores, the peaks of when people are, visiting their stores or their competitors. So we have a whole platform that essentially can help understand, make smarter marketing decisions. It's not as big brother as it sounds,
Yeah.
a lot of people are doing it, but I think people sometimes can get freaked out and they want to turn off all their location services, but it's a little bit of a necessary evil, especially if you don't want to just be targeted rogue ads. So, yeah, it's an industry that personally I never really knew fully existed. Even when I was in advertising, I didn't know too much about it. There's thousands of acronyms, and I feel like even my first day at the company I was previously at, and my first day as a seller, my boss even now will say, you knew nothing. You were very very junior, and so there to the point of we were making before, like there's just so many different avenues out there for things that you might find interesting. And I personally I like this because it kind of marries that idea of helping people and making smarter decisions. And it's a lot of relationship based, and it kind of marries advertising and advertising in unique ways. And so we help some of the world's largest brands from Sephora to Burger King to KFC or Nordstrom. And so it's kind of fun that you get to work with all these different brands. It's not just necessarily, a one track.
Totally. I implied it earlier, but you're a working mom and you're a very good and involved mom at that. When you're managing your career the way that you do, it involves a lot of travel, but you also find a way to really prioritize motherhood. In what ways do you feel kind of supported in balancing that work life mom relationship? And where do you think that there are kind of holes for women like you?
It's definitely changed the conversation around work has definitely changed even from me seeing my mom as a stay-at-home mom and all of the amazing pieces that come along with that, and she was always there when I got home. She was always reliant. And then I kind of saw the other flip side of, my dad who was constantly working or he was constantly traveling, but at least I always had some sort of a consistency. And so I think that, what's hard for our generation is that, we kind of had those role models or we had a lot more stay-at-home moms, and now it's kind of you have to work a lot of the times, I mean, families need dual incomes in order to just kind of, live with a certain lifestyle that they want. I know for our family, it's we want a certain lifestyle and we want to live in a certain place or go on certain vacations and buy certain things, then we both have to work. And that's kind of the necessary evil of it. But I think it also makes it much harder because we still have that mentality, at least I still have that mentality of I need to be the stay-at-home mom, but I also then need to be the working dad that travels, all that. From my perspective of how I grew up, I see that I feel the need to kind of be both. And that is definitely a struggle. And I feel like when I'm on the road, I'm traveling, I travel at least 1 week out of every single month. I miss my daughter so much. And I wonder how it's kind of affecting her overall. Is she going to look at me as being this is a strong mom who I know is working and I look up to her? Or is it going to be, oh, mommy was never there, and I think that you feel a lot of mom guilt. For me, the way that I kind of make it best is that, I have a really supportive partner who, when I leave, I feel very comfortable with leaving him and knowing that he's got the house taken care of. I know that she's going to be wearing zebra pants and an I Heart New York shirt, and her hair is gonna be all crazy, and she's probably eating chicken nuggets, but she is happy and alive. You kind of just have to to have that teamwork for sure. And I think that for me, the way that I deal with, kind of it is just making sure that I stay connected when I am home, when I am here. I do the drop offs still. I do the pickups. Today, for instance, I was the special reader at school or on weekends. Like I am shut off and my phone is down and I'm paying attention to her so that she doesn't feel that I'm constantly distracted because, you kind of have to make up for those periods where you feel the mom guilt that you're, constantly working or constantly traveling because it can be a toll.
Absolutely. Someone gave me the advice at one point where it's just like, if you're trying to work, but also kind of have that super present parent mentality. It's like you just have to be wherever you're choosing to be at any given moment, be all there, instead of
Mhm,
being half in. Like you got to do a lot of planning, like as I think all moms do, whether you're working or not. We have to do a lot of planning, but it's like once you've made your plan, just commit to it, and if you've made time to take your kid to dance class, like be there, get off your phone, watch your kid, and like
mhm.
everything can wait an hour, most things but then when you're working, like, try to kinda it's hard, I think, especially with the young children, but just be where you are when you're there. It seemed like really simple advice, and it's much easier said than done. But I think there's just a lot of, you get pulled in a lot of different directions, and I think even navigating kinda the tension between wanting to make all your children's dreams come true, while also being an example for them by making your own dreams come true is a lot. It's a funny balance that it's been a joy to be kinda in the middle of with you.
Yeah. I feel like too, it's also life is fluid, right? I mean, it's that for me personally, I love working with other moms as well. I mean, I think that you kind of sometimes you do have to do both. Like one of my sellers who is a very close friend, she will have her kids in the bathtub or, or wiping them while we're having a conversation about work. And I think, to the point of like yes to be present, I fully agree with that. Like when you've dedicated your space and your energy towards something, especially with your child, but at the same time we're all people, and I think that I personally like working with other women, especially working moms, because we kind of get it. We know how to multitask. We know that life happens, and even working dads, I mean, especially with the pandemic and people are working from home more, life happens and life is in the background all the time. And I think that, it's okay with also understanding that there can be boundaries. It's like, okay, my kids are home now, okay, or your kids are home now. Go. And I think that for personally the way that I like to manage as well as understanding again, like that people are people and people have a home life and that I'm not expecting you to be answering my emails at 8 o'clock at night. It just mean when I had time to write that email, but please don't respond until, you have the moment to do that. And I think the more that we can kind of shift away from that mentality of, you need to be in here 9 to 5 so I could see the whites of your eyes just because, I hate that mentality. This whole like going back to work, I get, in person, I get it because it can be super productive and being present is key. But I think that, people also have life going on, and I think that there can be a balance of both.
Totally. I think that's such good advice. Well, I feel like we could just sit here for hours, and we have, in other settings, and we'll continue to do so. But for purposes of our podcast, I'd love to kind of shift into we do like 5 questions. It'll be sort of random, but just answer whatever comes to mind first. So we'll do that and then kind of round out our night. For number one, do you have a morning routine?
I do. What time it starts is variable based off of when Isla comes into my bed. But usually I like to get up. I get up at like 5:30 and just kind of sit downstairs, like have my cup of coffee. I open, my planner for the day or I open my computer and I just kind of create like I'm all about the lists. So creating a list of both my personal stuff, my work stuff. For me, I have to have a little bit of just me time in the morning to get my head cleared. I wish I could say that I was meditating and, doing yoga or something like that. I mean, that's very few and far between, but for the most part, it's just kind of getting organized for the day and getting my head straight. So when I hear the little feet come down the stairs, then I can fully be present for her because I feel like I've already gotten a jump on my day.
Totally. I feel like it doesn't always happen because sometimes those little angels like to wake up before my planned time, but even just like sometimes it just looks like just getting my cup of coffee into my system and staring at a wall for like 3 minutes, but just like turning my system on sometimes before the rest of the day can kind of come at me, I think is enough of a routine sometimes too. Number 2, you've had a lot of mentors, you worked under people, you've worked managing a team. What is the best piece of advice you've been given along the way?
Oh, good question. It's not necessarily a mentor, but I think, I mean, to some way it is, but I feel like, I really, in my adult life, not so, probably so much growing up, but I feel like in my adult life, I really value and appreciate my dad more for his business acumen and, what he's kind of established in him of himself. And I think, just going back to that, like find something that you love, and it will kind of lead the way. I think getting closer to the center of your dartboard is always what he would say to me. And I think that would be my biggest piece of advice I would give to those that I hope to mentor, and or I do mentor is just try everything, never burn a bridge for sure. I mean, the world is so small and you never know when that's going to essentially come back to bite you. I mean, especially even in advertising, it's just so big, but everyone knows one another. And so as long as you can have a reputation that you can respect and be proud of, then you never really have to worry.
I love that. I love the dartboard visual too. It's really like operating from your center, what's kind of true to you and what you can confidently stand behind. So good.
Mhm.
For number 3, what would you say your biggest area of struggle was for you as a teen and how do you see it now?
I would say confidence for sure. I think, I was not fully confident in and of myself. And I think it took me a lot more of life experience and, maybe leaving my comfort zone a lot more to build that confidence up. I think once I kind of got out of my bubble for instance, went to college, outside of the New Jersey, New York area, I kind of saw my strengths differently. And I think I saw the things that I was really proud of in and of myself. And that's when I feel like I started to kind of thrive was when I built the confidence up in myself.
I love that you mentioned too that it was like your confidence started building once you got outside your comfort zone. I think it's easy, especially as young women, we think that like, oh, I feel most confident when I'm like comfortable and I know exactly what's coming and I'm in my little bubble of friends and this is where I feel confident. But I think it is so true. The more instances you can give yourself to be outside your comfort zone and see that you can survive and make it and thrive through being
Mhm.
uncomfortable, the more confidence you can build. I love that.
Yeah.
Number 4, what does the perfect day look like for you?
Oh, sleeping in, no. Um,
Sleeping period.
yeah, getting a good night's sleep, sprawled out like a starfish, without a
Yes.
dog and a husband and a toddler in my bed. The perfect day, I mean, I think it would just be, it would be spent with family for sure. I don't live near family now. So for me, I think anytime that I can be near my parents or my sister or my extended family or my husband's family, to me, it's just like I soak that in so much because it's so important to me and to my husband. So I think, just spending time with my daughter and my husband and my extended family is kind of my perfect day.
I love it. Number 5, what are you most looking forward to?
I am looking forward to Christmas right now, for my daughter. She's 3, so she is very much in the, Santa and all of that kind of fun stuff, and I feel like being a parent, you kind of revisit your childhood. So, I'm interested to see how this holiday season is going to play out. But, I think just in life, I'm hoping for more kids. I'm hoping to grow our family. I'm looking forward to kind of what, my career has for me and just looking forward to the next, couple of years because I feel like this is a very pivotal time and change in life. So I'm looking forward to it.
A lot of life happening right now. I love
Yes.
it. Well, we always end with one question. I feel like I've been trying to figure out a better way to word it. I'm like, we got a new season going, but the gist of it is what was a quality that you had as a young person, as a child, that maybe you didn't appreciate then, but looking back on, you fully embrace?
Oh, good question. Probably more of my, ability to listen to my instinct. I think having, the values that I was instilled with, I think always, made me feel maybe a little bit more of the timid one or the one that, but didn't fully feel comfortable. But having that now and listening to myself and listening to my gut is definitely something that I find leads me in the right direction, whether it be, the reputation that I leave behind or just knowing that I can do the right things and that I'm proud of kind of that decision in myself is that always going with my gut is definitely something I feel like I didn't necessarily listen to all the time when I was younger, but I'm glad that I've developed that voice for myself.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today. I can't wait for our community to meet you. And if they do want to get in touch with you or learn more about your company, what's the best way for someone to find you?
Yes. So my company is Locala. You can find me at caitlin.carey at asklocala.com or my social media. I don't have that big of a following, but you can help me grow those numbers at Kate Carey on
Love it.
Instagram.
So good. Well, thank you so much, Caitlin. I will probably see you at the smoothie store this weekend, if not sometime soon. But thank you for your time, and we'll talk again soon.
Yeah, thank you so much. I loved being on your show.